Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head. And in this episode, we're taking a look at ADHD with Joseph Pack. He manages his ADHD drug-free and is also the editor of the drug-free ADHD newsletter. He has grown many companies in his time and currently holds a position of Director of Growth at the Tech Depot, which provides plug-in tech teams for early startups. I'll put links to the drug-free newsletter as well as other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem at all. I wanted to kick off our conversation really with all your business building. I was having to scroll through your profile and it just kept going with founder or director. And it's like, wow, have you had any sort of regular jobs in inverted commas?
Yeah. In a cafe.
In a cafe.
In a cafe, I don't think that my particular form of ADHD, whether that's different to others or not, is very conducive with employment. So I've just had to adapt my life to be self-employed.
Yes.
And first job I ever had was working in a pub, 14 years old. Second job was working in a pub. Third job working in a pub. Then a cafe. Then I started my own business.
So did you move out of the pubs at the age you were old enough to drink in the pubs?
Yeah, I think I did actually.
Swap beer for coffee.
Yeah.
And you started a lot of businesses as well. So we're going to take obviously a big dive into ADHD later, but do you find that's kind of how your mind works? Do you like growing stuff up from the beginning and then it gets to a certain point where it kind of loses the drive for you and then you find the next thing to do?
Definitely. I think that there's a very famous theory created in the 80s, I believe, about ADHD, which is one where it's called the hunters versus farmers theory.
Right.
It was created by Tom Hartman, who's actually in the USA, a very, very famous talk show host.
Oh, is he?
And he is now, but in the 80s, he was actually a psychologist. I guess he still is, but he was
interesting creative
psychologist. Yeah, and he said that people with ADHD are like hunters, and people without ADHD are like farmers. And he said that unfortunately the world has changed to favour those with farming skills, and those with the hunting skills are no longer required. This was in the 80s. Now, the internet around 1994, or the World Wide Web, I should say, around 1994, changed that. And now we actually live in a world that favours the hunter, so long as we can understand that, reframe ADHD in the hunter mindset, which is on the whole a more positive way to look at ADHD.
Yes.
The medicalized way, which is very negative. If you look at the diagnostic manuals for ADHD, it's all negative. And I personally think we can get into this, but I think you could spin every single negative in the diagnostic manual for ADHD. I think you can spin that into a positive. And if people with ADHD do that, they'll have a much better life. So, long-winded answer there, but founding businesses, creating new ideas, being there in the growth phase, they're all hunter tasks, you see. But when a business needs to be cared for over the long term, and managed carefully, that is not my forte in any way whatsoever. So I just understood quite early that there was a time where I needed to get out and then do something new.
Yes, I see. You grow them to a point and then let a shepherd come in to
absolutely
carry on with their trajectory. Do you keep tabs on these businesses and see where they're going past your kind of exit? Check how the shepherd's doing.
Yes.
Excellent. I like the hunters versus farmer theory. I kind of visualize it all on, and we will get back to the negatives and positives later, because I kind of feel there's a few things going on in the dyslexia world that I think are doing a similar idea, whether it's ahead or behind of the ADHD world. But, reframing it as a neurological difference and there's positives to it, I think is really important. And people sort of not hearing negatives all the time that myself as a dyslexic person found at school. I imagine ADHD at school was entertaining. So when did you find out you had ADHD? When did you get sort of the inklings for it?
I wasn't actually officially diagnosed until I was 27.
Blimey.
So that was 5 years ago. And that is quite late. Usually it's obviously diagnosed at school. Some people as early as 4 years old getting diagnosed. And in 2016, I had 5 very large seizures one night.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I ended up in hospital for 3 days and nobody could diagnose me. So they even put a lumbar puncture into my spinal column to check for meningitis, because one of the symptoms of meningitis is having seizures. And they just couldn't find anything else that was wrong. So anyway, it turns out that it wasn't meningitis. And on the second day that I was in hospital, I got taken from Manchester, well, a hospital in Manchester, which I can't remember which one it was, to a private hospital in Cheshire, Cheadle it was. And there was an expert neurologist who knew what the problem was immediately.
Oh, brilliant.
So I'd had these sort of idiosyncratic seizures, he called them, as a result of stress. So for the 2 years prior to the seizures, I'd been drinking 10 coffees per day.
Wow.
Not very strong ones as well from cafes.
That's a lot more than the recommended.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for anybody who doesn't know, you're supposed to drink 4 at the top end.
And even that's a lot.
That is, let's go for it.
Yeah. And then I was drinking a lot of alcohol as well, to sort of bring myself back down again. Now, if you drink that much caffeine, effectively there's a hormone in the brain where caffeine acts as an inhibitor to it. So that my brain basically did not know that it was tired. So I could stay awake for a lot of the night and not feel tired. And over a while, I was basically just topping my brain up with caffeine every single day. And after a while, my brain went, I can't do this anymore. And it just started having fits one night. And you know what? I actually have almost no memory of that.
Yeah.
Because the result of having seizures in that way meant that I had some memory loss. However, I've been filled in from my parents and from friends and things about what was happening. And I'd been having sort of anxiety panic attacks up until that moment as well. So, but no one really knew what was happening. Anyway, a year later, I then get diagnosed ADHD. And I realized in that moment I was self-medicating. So caffeine is a stimulant.
Yes.
The drugs that they use to treat ADHD are a stimulant. You see, so I was self-medicating with something, but I had no idea that I was self-medicating because I didn't know that I had ADHD at that time.
So this doctor knew the seizures were brought on by the extraordinary amount of caffeine floating around your system. It makes me think of the episode of Futurama where Fry tries to drink 100 coffees and he goes into this other plane.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, yeah. Clearly that's not what happens. No. But that specialist hadn't put the links together between that and the ADHD. That was something you'd worked out post, I guess, going on whatever the program is to be withdrawn from that much level of coffee in your system.
Yeah, I know, because I'd gone from 10 strong coffees a day to then 0. And I was living in Manchester and I had grown up in the Peak District, in Bakewell, in the Peak District. And I went back from Manchester to Bakewell and stayed there for a month living at my mum's house. And for an entire month, I was just on the sofa. So my body had been used to being propped up basically by the caffeine, and now take the caffeine away and all of a sudden I have no energy, no mental energy whatsoever. So all I could do was just lie there on the sofa doing quite literally nothing for a month. That's the effect of having too much caffeine. Now, caffeine, I'm not here to say that caffeine is a bad thing, but don't drink 10 a day. That's basically.
Today's advice is don't drink 10 cups of coffee a day.
Yeah.
Must admit, nowhere near the same, but I enjoy coffee and realised my habit had gone up to 3 a day, and then was ill for a week and just drunk a bit of coffee to not have withdrawals, which is a fun headache when you're ill. And I was like, wow, I sleep a lot better on one a day. I'm not going to creep this back up again.
It's funny, because I used to struggle with sleep a lot. And then when I stopped, so I don't drink any caffeine at all anymore.
I'm not surprised.
No coffee, no tea, no nothing.
Yeah.
And I sleep so well now.
Yeah.
It's night and day, the difference between how I was before.
Yes. Yeah, I can only imagine. Having drunk far too much Red Bull and Monster while trying to do a university dissertation, you end up. Yeah. But it is funny. Yeah, I am debating whether to kind of take a week off and just see if I pass out completely overnight rather than waking up sometimes in the middle of it.
Have you heard of Michael Pollan?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, you should. So Michael Pollan's written lots and lots of books, mostly around food. And he wrote a fantastic book called Food Rules, which I highly recommend. But he also wrote a book that came out about 3 years ago called How to Change Your Mind. And it's all about psychedelics and how psychedelic drugs are used to treat mental health issues, mental illnesses. So that's one of that. So he was already famous, but he became a lot more famous when he wrote that book. And now he's talking a lot about caffeine and the effects of caffeine. So there's quite a few podcast episodes at the moment with him talking about that are worth listening to.
Okay, I'll give that a look. So you found out a year later that you actually, what the problem was, you were propping yourself up because you had ADHD. Did this talk to a few dyslexics, well, quite a few dyslexics on this podcast they find out in their teens, mid-20s, or when their children get statement dyslexia, sort of stuff from their younger age clicks into place. Was that kind of the same experience for you?
Yeah, 100%. Because I did that. Well, I say one of the reasons why I ended up becoming the founder of many companies was because I did so poorly at school. Mm-hmm. And it was that, I don't think I even finished a book until I was about 23 years old.
Okay.
I literally didn't. So, for example, I'd read a third of about 5 Harry Potter books when I was a teenager, but never finished them. And I didn't even really, my parents, to be fair to them, were very, very good. They never over pressured me to do anything that I didn't want to do and stuff. And so I never thought anything of it. I never really thought anything of the fact that I'd not finished any books. Mm-hmm. But then when I got diagnosed ADHD, I realized that it was quite an unusual thing. And I realized, okay, there are a lot of other people here with ADHD that have had the exact same experience. And in that moment, I felt quite comfortable in the fact that I'd been diagnosed.
Yes. Yeah. So for me, not reading a book is because it's a struggle to read it. For yourself, is it just, you get, for want of a better phrase, bored, fed up of it in the middle, or just kind of lose track of what's going on, want to look into something else now? I think it's boredom. I definitely don't have a problem with reading the words. But so nowadays I read a lot of books, but I still only finish about 50 or 60% of the ones that I start. And I've realized that is the right thing for me to do. And in fact, I think it might be the right thing for most people to do. And that is because, so I'll get halfway through a book and then I'm not necessarily completely bored of the book I'm reading, but there is another book that I'd rather read. So I just start reading that one. Yeah.
And my brain works in such a way that even if I read the final half of the book, I wouldn't remember anything. Because I'm no longer engaged in the contents of the book.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm battling through a book at the minute and I'm like, what happened at the beginning? And I'm stuck in that mindset. I've started it, so therefore I must finish it. Started it 12 months ago, he says.
Right, yeah. I think that learning to put books down that you're not interested in anymore is a skill that's worth learning.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How, I guess, a bit of social pressure, maybe a bit of school pressure. You think you've started the book and then you've got to get to the end of it. But if it really isn't grabbing you, then why bother? There's plenty of other books. And this particular one was a movie, so I could always watch that if I want the quick version.
Exactly.
So to kind of context as we move into more sort of the ADHD side, what is the conventional thinking of ADHD? If I was asking you for like a dictionary definition of it, how would you describe it to people?
I think it's often characterized as someone who can't pay attention, someone who can't follow directions, someone who's irritable, so obviously someone who's very hyperactive, someone who bounces from thing to thing very, very quickly, someone who never finishes anything. Now, I know that I've just spoken about not finishing books, but I do think there's a caveat to that point. And that is that it depends how interesting the thing is. Now, I think that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a terrible term. I don't think it describes ADHD very well at all. Because the thing about people with ADHD, and you can speak to most people with ADHD, and they'll tell you that there is something that they're obsessed with. It might be 3 things. It might be 5 things. There's often at least one thing they're obsessed with, and they can pay attention to that for days. And there is a thing in ADHD called hyperfocus.
Yeah.
You know about that, yeah? Where someone might start working on something, say building an iPhone app or something, and then literally can't stop because they are just so unbelievably focused on this task. Now, that is both a blessing and a curse, because it really can get you into a bad spot when you're in that sort of hyper-focus phase. Now, when I'm having a bad day, sometimes I can hyper-focus on YouTube videos. And I'll literally be lost in them for 12 hours.
Yes, I see. It's like a double-edged sword. If you're building an iPhone app that could potentially make money, help people, whatever, that's great. But if you're just watching YouTube all day, that's not so helpful for you. Well, maybe you've learned something depending on what you're watching, but it's cat videos all day.
Well, I've had enough experience that, honestly, you don't really learn that much.
Yeah.
Not that much. So I think the other thing that people often associate with ADHD is the naughty boy in class. That's probably the most damaging.
There's that horrible thing of, I think I'm just a bit ADD or ADHD. That's doing a disservice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, because actually the attention deficit, when you're talking about hyperfocus, that's not attention deficit at all. That's the polar opposite, isn't it?
Exactly.
Which goes back to the Hunter theory.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that when I was at school, obviously I didn't know that I was ADHD at school, but I used to be very, very bored in class. And I used to do what I could do to be naughty. So I would pull little girls' hair when I was at primary school, or I would throw things when I was in secondary school. Yeah. And only about a year ago, I sat down and thought about that and realized why I was doing it. Now, I wasn't pulling the little girl's hair because I wanted the little girl to tell me off. I was doing it because I wanted the teacher to tell me off. And this sounds really unusual, but and this is an assumption I'm making from what I've read in the neuroscience research around ADHD, is that my dopamine levels must have been very, very low while I was sitting down in class, bored. Yeah. So to get told off by the teacher is a boost in dopamine, is a boost in adrenaline. It's not scary, and it never was. I was never ever scared of the teacher. I needed something to keep me awake, and that would have been getting the teacher to tell me off. So anything that a teacher told me to not do, I wanted to do it. And I know that is I feel sorry for every teacher that has to put up with that. But that's just the way that it was.
Yeah, just painting a picture in my mind, sort of the dopamine level, say the average, the normal, whatever it is here. And then you're actually sitting underneath that, sitting still. And all you're doing is bumping it to just above what is normal. So it's not an adrenaline rush and the heart goes up. It's like I move from and almost snoring to I'm kind of awake now.
yeah, exactly.
Where if I was trying to do that to a girl in class, my heart would be already racing and the adrenaline would have kicked in before I'd even started to try and make sure I didn't get caught.
It's such an unusual thing. So I think that's where, so my whole thing around ADHD is drug-free ADHD. Now, this is where the conversation around medication comes in. So if you think about a child in class who cannot sit down,
yes,
you have 2 options. 1, force them to sit down. Okay, they're not going to learn anything, but you can force them. How do you make forcing them to sit down easier? You give them a drug. And that will genuinely make them sit down. That's one way. Second way, don't make them sit down. Find another way for them to learn, a way that is natural to them so that you don't have to drug them. That's what I'm all about.
Yes. So the sort of current medication is almost like it has a sedative effect, does it, for most of the time?
Basically, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, because I obviously don't know much about ADHD medication, but
it's a stimulant. It doesn't make you rushed. It makes you, I wouldn't even say it makes you calm. It does make you focused. It makes you focused for a period of hours. But then there's a very big drop off at the end. So basically imagine that your dopamine levels are at a baseline, a low baseline, and then you take the medication and your dopamine levels go up quite high. So then you have the motivation to do things you wouldn't necessarily want to do. You are able to focus on things that you don't necessarily want to do. But then after a few hours, usually mid-afternoon, you get a big crash and you usually go down in dopamine levels now through the baseline. So you're actually lower than you were in the morning. And often during the time that the medication is in your system, you have no appetite whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not the best experience.
No, I assume you've tried these drugs.
I had tried a couple, but I ended up going to see the neuroscientist who treated me for ADHD. Who treated me for the seizures, and spoke to him about this. And he said, do not take those. Not after what's happened to you. He says, think about it. Stimulant abuse, basically, caffeine caused your problem. So you do not want to be taking more of those.
No.
And that one conversation was the beginning of a long journey of me experimenting with natural techniques that could replace the medication.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Do you know what, when you were explaining how it worked, I was like, it's almost like sugar, isn't it? You have a big spike and it carries on and then you completely crash. So these ADHD children are coming in the morning with the drug in their system, laser focused for most of the morning, and then nightmares after lunch, I assume, unless they redose at lunchtime. Unless
they take it again, but that doesn't happen very often. And nor should it really, because then you've got kids that are just not going to eat.
Yes, and that's not great for children either.
No. So I watched there's a documentary on the BBC called The Doctor Who Gave Up Drugs by Chris Van Tulliken. You may have heard of him. He showed some research that showed that children that take Ritalin, so the ADHD medication is called Ritalin, are something like an inch or two on average shorter than the equivalent child who doesn't take the medication.
Because the appetite suppression. Eating. Yeah. They're not fueling the growth. No. That's scary, isn't it?
It is.
Do you think they roll into adults that are still taking drugs all the way through their adult life? Or do you think quite a lot of people come off the drugs as adults and just live with it?
So I've been fortunate to speak to a lot of people who have ADHD. And obviously the vast majority of my conversations around people who have either taken the medication and want to get off it, or never want to take it, or they are considering it, but would still, and they're usually the ones considering it are people who've been diagnosed later in life with adult ADHD, and they don't know whether to take it or not, and they would rather use the natural techniques that I talk about first before they try the medication. So what you find is people that are around 20 to 25 tend to be still taking the medication and don't want you to talk about not taking it. They're very sensitive about it, almost.
Right. Okay.
People that are 30-ish, 30 to 50, they tend to be, they've either really want to stop taking it or have already stopped taking it if they started taking it as children. And some of them have already come and started experimenting with natural techniques.
I could see that. you don't really want to be taking drugs all your life. And I always think about other things. If stuff hurts or whatever, you've got to have surgery because your knee's gone. I think I try all the physios, osteos, chiros, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yoga, whatever, before I ever had to touch a knife or a surgeon touch me with a knife. You'd throw everything at the wall, wouldn't you, before you sort of side yourself up? Because it must be, once you're on it must be really hard to get back off it again, I would have thought.
I mean, I obviously can't talk about specific people, but there's one guy that I've spoken to a lot, and he is so desperate to stop taking it. But he is so used to taking them and has been doing since he was about 8 or 9. He's now in his mid-20s. That he can't even speak to me on a Zoom call unless he's taking his medication. So I said to him, okay, should we try not taking the medication? And he just said, I would literally not be able to stay awake during our call if I wasn't taking the medication. Yeah, and I just thought, wow.
Yeah,
that's not normal. That is only as a result of the medication.
Yeah, but that sounds really terrible. The fact you've got to take medication to bring yourself up even to a baseline to be a functioning adult. So that kind of brings me on to your approach and the drug-free ADHD medication. I'm really struggling with ADHD for some reason today. Now, obviously, caffeine mixed with alcohol was not the best start to that kind of way of going. Although I suppose both of them are technically drugs, aren't they? Just legal ones and not ones you need to get prescribed. So you tried the conventional route. Then you spoke to your specialist who said you probably shouldn't do this. What got you thinking into other routes?
So immediately after that conversation with the neurologist, I started Googling for, okay, what does the ADHD medication actually do? I wanted to know that first. Okay, so it boosts dopamine. That's the main thing it does. Okay, why? Okay, because people with ADHD have a lower level of dopamine. That seems pretty simple. Next Google search, what boosts dopamine? It was that simple. And it was so funny because I came across something that I thought I would never do my whole life, which is ice baths. So it turns out that cold exposure is basically a certain period of time in an ice bath boosts dopamine to the equivalent level as cocaine.
Oh, okay.
So it's that powerful.
Yeah.
The only thing is, the ice bath is generating dopamine from inside the body. Whereas taking a drug, drinking caffeine, or taking cocaine, they are generating dopamine from something external.
Mm-hmm.
So that was actually, that Google search may have been one of the most important of my whole life because it started me thinking that there must be other ways to trigger certain chemicals inside the body that will help me manage ADHD.
Yes, so you can see
from cold exposure, I then discovered Wim Hof, who now has this series on TV. But this was 2017, where he was sort of an underground hero to a lot of fitness people. Yes. And I watched this video of him just swimming in the canal in Amsterdam on Christmas Day, I think it was. Yeah. Just in his shorts. And I was like, that guy is crazy. And and then he had loads of, so I then started taking what I was calling at the time hydrotherapy showers, which would be like 30 seconds of hot water, 30 seconds of cold water in a cycle for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that would make me feel really calm at the end of it. And then I just, honestly, it does to me anyway. And then
I've done that on various injuries before, the hot and cold therapy, and calm is not the way I feel afterwards.
That's the ADHD part there, isn't it? And then I then ended up just really going to town with the cold showers. I got up to about 5 minutes under the cold water without any hot water before it. So I'd basically just go straight into the shower, turn it on to fully as cold as it will go, and have a 5-minute shower. And I'd do that every single day. And then I got to the point where I was ready to take an ice bath. So I did all of this on my own without any guidance, which is actually not the right way to do it. So if for anyone that's listening that is interested in doing what I did, have the cold showers by all means. But when you want to get in an ice bath, please do it with a specialist because it can be quite dangerous.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. So then I then learned from Wim Hof about the certain breathing techniques. So there are quite a few different breathing techniques that can do all sorts of different things for your body, mostly around regulation of the heart. So if you breathe very fast and intensely, your heart rate goes up. If you breathe very slowly and deeply, your heart rate goes down. So you're able to control your body just through the breath. Now, if you breathe quickly, your body temperature also goes up. Right, which is very important if you're getting in ice cold water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these things, multiple brain scans, like imagery of ADHD brains, have shown that there's a restriction of alcohol in the neocortex. Alcohol?
Alcohol?
Yeah. Let's rephrase that.
Yeah, cortisol?
Restriction of alcohol?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll go again with that. Maybe leave that in.
Yeah, I think so.
There's multiple brain imaging from neuroscience research on ADHD brains has shown a restriction of oxygen to the neocortex. So breathing techniques obviously force more oxygen into the brain. So if I'm feeling really like my ADHD symptoms are bothering me a lot, I can remedy that quite quickly with a breathwork technique that takes no more than 3 minutes.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So most people breathe through their mouth a lot of the time.
But
if you breathe through your nose, you've got, your mouth is effectively just a hole in your face and then your throat that goes straight down to your lungs. Yeah. But your nose has all of these blood vessels and tissue that can soak oxygen in before it gets anywhere near the throat. And it's very, very important that oxygen actually goes through that. So if you were to breathe very, very deeply through your nose, very deeply, you're getting so much more oxygen into your bloodstream by doing that. So if you breathe very deeply through the nose and out through the mouth, you're going to get lots of oxygen to the brain. And if you do that very, very intensely, so like 1 second in, 1 second out, you're getting just the right amount of oxygen to be able to focus for a period of time.
Yes. I read a book, Breath by James Naylor. You might have come across it, and doing all the explanation of basically your nose has got all this clever sinus cavity that does all this nice filtering and delivers air to the lungs in a rate the lungs can process it. If you start breathing your mouth all the time, the system doesn't work. It's got too much volume. It doesn't know what to do with it, and you actually get less out of it. It's less efficient.
Yeah. It's a great book, actually.
It is a very good book. Yes. So breathing techniques, because it's really interesting. It's funny how like a preconception of, I'm thinking of bringing yourself down, but actually you need to bring yourself up all the time to be on the right sort of baseline. So actually you're doing breathing techniques that, if you do meditation, would be the complete wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating hearing the kind of lift up ones. There's no kind of box breathing or gentle, slow breaths. It's all up oxygen in and drive dopamine. So is most of your kind of drug-free methods, obviously you said about contrast therapy with the shower and the ice bath and breathing.
Yeah.
What else do you utilize quite often?
So I use meditation.
You
twice
do?
a day.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I do. So that's just the reason that I use meditation so much is because definitely people with ADHD, we have a very loud voice in our head that just never ever stops shouting and telling us to do something different than what we're doing in this exact moment.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, from a philosophical standpoint, I actually believe that is ADHD. It is the voice in your head shouting constantly at you to do something else. And meditation, its most powerful use case for us is that it creates a space between me or my consciousness, the part of me that hears the voice and the voice itself.
Yes.
So meditation is often billed as something that you can use for calming yourself down or relieving of anxiety or whatever. That's all fine. That is all true. But I think there's a much deeper reason for meditation, and that is to create space in your head so that you can come to terms with the fact that that voice in your head isn't you. I know that we're going to get a little bit, we're going down a deep channel here maybe, but the fact that you can actually hear that voice proves that it isn't you. You are the part inside of you that hears that voice speaking.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you do lots of meditation, you'll realize, okay, God, that voice in my head is just constantly talking all the time. And the objective is to keep coming back to the breath every time. And then you'll realize there is a space. And actually, I can hear the voice. I can hear it. I need it to shut up. But the more you want it to shut up, the more noisy it becomes. So the trick is just to let it happen. So it's almost like you're sat in there watching it speak, but you're not getting involved with it.
Yes.
So that means that later on in the day, when something happens and you hear your voice go, quit your job, you don't listen to it. Because that is what it's going to say when you have ADHD. It's going to say that. It's going to say something stupid, like quit your job.
Yeah. And I guess without the meditation to catch it, or the self-awareness that meditation brings, you would be typing email up. Or already walking towards the office of your boss.
Well, I'd be going on Keynote and making a mood board about what I want my life to look like. I'd be going to my whiteboard and writing down loads of things that I want to happen. But this is my mind telling me what I should do. But I shouldn't listen to my mind because it's got me into all sorts of trouble in my life. That's basically what.
Yes. Yeah. It's not the inner critic, but it's this jumpy part in your mind that's
exactly.
Yes.
And we don't, if this is one thing that in Eastern teachings around meditation and yoga, they understand this on a very deep level. And us in the West, we don't so much. So we too closely associate with that voice in our heads. We believe that is us and that we should listen to everything that it says. But I'm telling you from firsthand experience, your life becomes much better when you just stop listening to it.
Yes. I've used meditation before, and I like the idea. There's the catch between the kind of feeling and the response, and it's that kind of area in between. And it is that you get rid of the inner critic, or you sat there, and right. I'm doing it first thing in the morning, and my brain's going, right, I need to do this today. Go to the shops, back to, and the rep, isn't it? It's the rep of coming back all the time. So there's lots of different types of meditation, and I've tried many of them. And I think that things like what you just described there is like a form of what they call Vipassana meditation, which was supposedly created by the Buddha himself 2,500 years ago, I think. And that is cool. That's effectively a type of deep concentration meditation, and that can be very, very difficult for people with ADHD. Okay,
the thing is, most people with ADHD try that type of meditation and then claim that they can't meditate. So they're then missing out on all of the benefits of it.
Yes, it's an important point. Yeah.
The best type of meditation for people with ADHD to try first is what's called transcendental meditation. Mm-hmm. Now, transcendental meditation is the easiest form of meditation by far. So what you do is you set the timer for 20 minutes. You sit down in a chair. You don't have to fold your arms or legs or do anything like that. And you just breathe in through the nose, out through the nose. And as you breathe in, you repeat a mantra. And as you breathe out, you repeat a mantra. Now, the mantra could just be Om, or it could be like a Sanskrit word like Kirin or something like that. Something that has no meaning to you.
Yeah.
So that as you do it, repeat it over and over and over again for 20 minutes, you start to drift backwards deep into your consciousness.
Okay. Yeah.
And when you get to the end of it, you just feel refreshed. Now, Jerry Seinfeld has been a big proponent of transcendental meditation, and I heard him say on a YouTube video once something like, transcendental meditation is like you've got a cell phone and someone gives you the charger. It's like you never had the charger for the phone, it just didn't work. Yeah. And transcendental the meditation is like plugging yourself into the socket and giving you the energy you never had.
Yeah. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger did it for a bit as well.
Did he?
Yeah. Okay. If somebody wants to try that, is there any place you can recommend they go to give that a go, or is it something you really need to be trained on?
I think you need to go. Well, I have an opinion on this, but I'm not sure it's certainly not the commonly held opinion. So Vipassana meditation, which I've just explained is very hard, you can learn completely for free. And but you have to go on a 10-day retreat and you're not allowed to speak for the first 9 days. So that is super hardcore.
Yeah, that is pretty savage.
Transcendental meditation, which is literally exactly what I've just described and no more difficult, costs all like £700 or £800 for a teacher. And I think that's just plain wrong. Mm-hmm. So you can find out how to do transcendental meditation from Googling around and watching YouTube videos. And to be honest with you, if you have like show notes or anything, there are a couple of things that I could send you that you can put in.
Yes, yeah, please do. And I'll put the links in the show notes for everybody to find out. We covered breath work, contrast therapy, meditation. Just kind of think what other sort of key pillars you have to your kind of toolbox for this. Because that covers quite a lot, doesn't it, really? Mm-hmm. Ways of getting dopamine up, ways of closing the inner voice down that tells you to quit your job when you really shouldn't do, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think the other thing is diet.
Of course, yes. Yeah. Don't tell me low sugar, not much chocolate.
Low sugar. I don't eat, well, I try very hard not to eat carbs until after I finished work.
Okay.
So, as in like complex carbohydrates, so like a potato or bread or something, because it just, I think, I wasn't really sure of the reason, but apparently it's because some foods, like a complex carb, takes a lot of energy for your stomach to digest. So, and the stomach goes, right, I need more energy from somewhere, and it takes some of it from the brain. So as you are digesting the food, the brain is not focusing in the way that it was before you ate. And therefore, so if you do like any types of yoga, a lot of the time they'll ask you to not eat for 4 hours before the session. And actually the reason for that is not because you're going to be sick. It's actually because you're not able to focus on the breath or on what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, because the brain is the most resource heavy organ, followed by the digestive system. So you more on like no complex carbs. You're on like more like a meat only or a ketogenic diet for most of the day, and then switch.
It's just a whole food diet.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll usually eat something like a chia pudding for a breakfast, which is just like literally yogurt with chia seeds in it that have soaked overnight. And then maybe some like a little bit of fruit. Sometimes I just don't eat any breakfast at all. Like quite often I do that. That works very well, usually. And then things like salads and stuff is pretty good. So I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat any meat.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, of course. So that's interesting, is it? Just taking the power away from the brain to digest complex carbs starts giving you problems. Can you sort of feel it coming on at all? I'm kind of curious if you think, this time at lunch I'm going to have that jacket potato or whatever, and then you sat there in the middle of the afternoon like,
oh yeah, every time.
Every time, yeah.
But one thing that works actually quite well is going back to the meditation again. So if I say like I'll meditate usually about 2:00 in the afternoon again for 20 minutes, and then it's like a reset. So that effectively I've plugged the phone into the charger.
Yes.
Again for 20, and I'm back again.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Refresh, and then I can focus.
Yeah, I guess what I was just thinking really is that the fact that you are self-employed and probably work from home quite a lot, it's quite easy to go off and do that kind of thing rather than a kind of formal office environment where what do you do, go out to the car, or it's really hard, isn't it, in sort of
that's environments why I've been
that don't control.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm if I go on, so just look at my LinkedIn analytics, for example. the top 5 job titles from the people that follow me are like founder, co-founder, CEO. Like, so I'm sort of attracting that type of person anyway. A lot of the stuff that I think about and talk about is obviously mostly applicable to people who work for themselves. And I think that's the way it should be, because I don't want to scam anybody. And I want to speak from my truth and have skin in the game, per se, that this is what works for me. And I'm not just making it up. But I do get a few people who have, are employed and work in an office that ask me, what do I do? And I've come up with several things that could help. So one of the advantages of the breathing techniques is that they're quite quick. So you could, in theory, go to the bathroom. You could, depending on what sort of person you are and how confident you are around your colleagues, you could sit at your desk and do the breathing techniques.
Yes, you could. Yeah. As you say, it depends on how friendly you are with your colleagues. So, the breathe. It's funny, isn't it? Like how much the respiratory system really drives how the body works. Because it's not just for people with ADHD. It's across the board. We can do things with breath that we self-medicate with too much food or caffeine or whatever, and I think there's a sort of slow underground kind of movement on it that's sort of getting some traction, but it is really a fascinating subject to get into.
Definitely. Another thing, which is this is not going to work in an office at all, but you can, I know. So, but it's actually what I call ground working. So there's a way to live called ground living, which is basically when you have no furniture in your house. So you'll have like a table with legs that are, say, like 6 inches high or maybe slightly higher. And there are around 100 different sitting positions that you can take. Okay. You have to be quite flexible to do this. One of them is a squat.
Yeah.
Now, if you work in these 100 different positions by moving your laptop around the room, you're only able to stay in each position for 3 to 5 minutes before it becomes too uncomfortable. But that means that you're moving your body the whole time. And one of the biggest problems with ADHD is that you sit in a chair all day staring at a computer screen and you very quickly become bored. But if you're moving around while you're doing it, and I've done this a lot of times, you actually stay focused. And this is without breathing, without meditation, without worrying about diet, without medication.
Just by swapping the chairs out.
Just by moving.
Yeah. We're not supposed to be chained to desks, are we?
Definitely not. Because even the seating, so there's no chair shape in nature at all. There's literally no shape like that.
No.
So, and the chair is like a cast on our arm, like when we break our arm, and our bodies become weaker from sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
And we become so weak that we end up having to sit in the chair to feel comfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
So I posted about this on social media a while ago, but I was following Ido Portal's 30 minutes per day squat challenge, which is where you do 30 minutes of squats per day for 30 days. And you don't have to do 30 minutes in a row. You can do still like 2 minutes or 3 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
And what that does is it's strengthening the whole spine, strengthening the legs, the buttocks, everything, even like the ankles. And if you can stay in a squat for 30 minutes comfortably, then you're in the ultimate resting position. Because if you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, they don't have chairs, obviously. So the way that they'll stand, squat, or lie down.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. And you look at a toddler doing anything, they're squatting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like other countries that don't have a toilet that you sit on in a seating position, have loads of flexibility that countries that use toilets don't.
Yeah. And if you go to Asia and you'll, if you go to a small street food vendor and you look behind the sort of into the kitchen, you'll see often men and women sat there, squatting down, peeling potatoes.
Yes.
And you'll come back an hour later and they're in the exact same position. So they're just used to being in squat, but we have lost the ability in the West to squat. Yes. It's an extremely important movement. And it sounds tangential to the conversation around ADHD, but I actually believe it to be very closely linked. Because if we can squat well, we can then groundwork. And that means we can move around while we work, and we're more likely to pay attention.
Yes. Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, because you're forever shuffling between left and right feet, moving around, because you know when your knee is in the same position for hours.
Exactly. So that's where it comes to the whole thing I'm talking about here is what I call a natural focus.
Yes.
So there's just like a term that I coined, and it's that we can, if we look at what hunter-gatherer tribes are doing, if we look at how they live, and if we try and live in a similar way, then our ADHD symptoms will disappear.
Yes.
I get a little bit of pushback when I say things like that from people in the ADHD community, because they believe that ADHD is something that cannot be transformed. They believe it's something that's just so deeply ingrained into us. That may be true, but I choose to not believe that is a fact. I think it should just be a possibility, but it may also be an equal possibility that we can actually transform ourselves to the point where we're not even noticing we have ADHD.
Yes. And then once you've got, should we say, some of that kind of traits managed, we were talking about positives and negatives earlier. What are the positives? I think we focused a lot on, for want of a better phrase, management. But I imagine now you're managing it without use of drugs and all these techniques, which is probably a sign of having ADHD, that you've wanted to go and dive in and research all this stuff and got focused into it. But does that let you, for want of a better phrase, unleash it to assist your own life and improve things around you?
It absolutely does. I mean, I think that those of us with ADHD, we're not broken in any way. We're just differently skilled. Now, going back to the hunter-farmer theory, if we're working in a farming world, the farmers will become very frustrated with us. They'll want us to get therapy and take medication so that we can fit into their box and do it the way they do it.
Yeah.
That is not the answer. The answer is to find what we're uniquely good at and do that to the best of our abilities. And I think a lot of people with ADHD want to set goals. They decide they want something and they want to go and get it. But they do often do that, at least the ones I speak with, without a real consideration of what they're naturally good at. So they end up having to do farming skills, farming things to get what they want. I think the harsh truth is that we have to ditch those goals. We have to understand what we're good at. We have to do those to the best of our abilities and then be happy and also surprised and thrilled with the things that come out of that.
Yes, most definitely.
So it's a total reversal on the common wisdom of set a goal, work really hard to get it. It says throw the goals in the bin, stick to what you're good at, and then just enjoy the outcome as it comes without having any preconceived notion of what that outcome is.
Oh, that is really interesting to stand on its head, isn't it? But I could understand how that fits in really well with, it's something with quite a lot going on with dyslexia, as I mentioned earlier, where it's, some people refer to it as, I refer to it as a dyslexic strength, some people refer to it as superpowers, but how it's, we need diverse teams to build things, create things, do whatever. So maybe we do need a dyslexic person, autistic person, somebody who's neurotypical, somebody with ADHD in these teams, but they need to know their strengths to lean into it all to make sure that we get the best out of everybody rather than just kind of fitting one box and going forwards.
What you're going to get from people with ADHD, people who are autistic, dyslexic people, is a different perspective.
Yes.
That is one of the biggest strengths by far. So if you have, say, that a team of 4 with ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, neurotypical person, and everyone's working together, You're going to get 4 different perspectives. And if everyone works together well, you're going to get something amazing out of that. And actually, most big companies need to understand that. They need to understand that very, very quickly. And I think the ones that do get it, they're going to have an advantage.
Yes. Yeah, it's the synergistic effect of having multiple things together.
Yeah.
Okay. So this kind of brings me to sort of winding the podcast up. I have 3 rapid fire questions I always ask all podcast guests. I'm going to modify them a bit because they're all about dyslexia. And I think we touched on quite a lot of it, but they don't need rapid fire answers from you, but they are quick questions from me. So we dive into question number 1. What prejudices have you had about ADHD that has been proven wrong?
I think that the idea that children with ADHD should be medicated to fit into the neurotypical box is actually a crime against ADHD.
Yes.
And it should be changed very quickly. And unfortunately, I think it's getting worse. Because it is easier to give someone a drug than it is to change the way that someone works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately so. Okay, the second question. If an alien landed and you were to explain ADHD to them, how would you do it?
I'll definitely use the hunter versus farmer theory.
Yes.
So, stop trying to be a farmer. You're never going to be a good farmer. Be a hunter.
Be a hunter.
Follow your instincts.
Yes. No, that's cool. And the final question of the podcast. And normally I say, seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show, any dyslexia life hacks. But I was going to ask you any ADHD life hacks, but your whole system is that. So if there's some little thing you can add on, that'd be cool for this question.
I think, actually, if you do have ADHD, I think some of the things I mentioned today could be quite daunting, not least the ice baths.
Yes.
Now, if you want something, the number one thing that I can recommend that I think will make a big change in your life is to learn the breathing techniques. Now, you can use Wim Hof is probably one of the best people to learn this from, but there is actually an app called Breathwork without an O. That's how it's spelled. And you can get that on iOS and Android. And it is fantastic. You literally just go immediately into it. And they're all named, labeled like anxiety ease or brain fog, etc. So it's really easy to find the ones that are going to work for you.
Yes. Yeah, I've used that myself, actually. It's really good.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add? Where can people find you?
So I write a weekly email newsletter, and that is on www.drugfreeadhd.org. And I am posting on LinkedIn every single day under the name of Joseph Pack. I think the LinkedIn URL, which is not the sort of thing that people would usually put into their browser, would be is actually linkedin.com/natural focus.
Oh, cool. Nice URL. Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about ADHD. It's something I don't know too much about, but I know it co-occurs with dyslexia quite often. So it's really interesting to find out. And it's been really cool to talk about all these sort of drug-free methods, which do carry across to other things if you're just generally struggling with focus.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. And I will see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye for now.